Alrighty, I have my water, I have my smoothie. Okay. Hello and welcome back to another monthly recap. May was an absolutely insane month for me, both life-wise and reading-wise. Life stuff I won't get into right now because that is not what you guys came to watch this video for. You guys came to hear about the books that I've been reading. Who likes my shirt? It's a Winnie the Pooh shirt. Anyways, I'm going to stop getting sidetracked. I only own 3 of the books that I read this month. But in total, I read 11 books. My previous record was 9. That has broken the record. Mostly because I got my library card onto Libby this month. So I listen to more audiobooks than usual. But my average rating right now is sitting at a 3.86. So, alright. Well, I think part of the reason that I read so many books this month is A, the Libby audiobooks, but B is actually what I want to talk about first, and that is starting the month off with a reading 200 pages a day video. The first book I read in that video was Final Girls by Riley Sager. This is a thriller, and it's about a girl who survived a massacre. She was the lone survivor of her and her 6 friends who stayed in a cabin. They all got slaughtered in one night, and she was the only one that survived. She is considered a final girl, which is a horror movie reference for the last woman standing in a horror movie. That is what the media has deemed her. There are 2 other girls who have survived similar scenarios, and this book picks up where one of those other girls has suddenly killed herself. You're following the main girl. She finds out that the other girl killed herself, and then the 3rd girl shows up to basically keep tabs on our main character. Riley Sager is very interesting. Like, I have good and bad experiences with him. Final Girls, I think, is my 2nd favorite book by him. I rated it 4 stars. It was definitely more of a classic true crime murder mystery type thing. You had no idea what was going on for most of it. The twists are amazing in Riley Sager books. Like, if you like twists, read Riley Sager. The next book I read is Today, Tonight, Tomorrow by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This book and one other book on this list I read because I was graduating in May. This was just a book that fit really well with that. You have the 2 main characters. One of them is valedictorian, the other is salutatorian, but they have been consistent academic rivals. And it's a young adult romance that takes place over the span of 24 hours, as evidenced by the title. Their school, the weekend before graduation, they play this game called Howl, which is a combination of a scavenger hunt and assassin. Her and her rival kind of team up and fall in love, basically. So it's rivals to lovers. The social issues are very heavy in that book, and the story doesn't feel completely fleshed out because it is only a 24-hour time span. I rated it 3.5 stars. I think I read it at the perfect point in my life. It was just a really atmospheric read. Then I read One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is a gothic fantasy, a very simple gothic fantasy. It is a world dominated by this mist, and this mist can infect you. The girl that we're following, Elspeth, she was infected by the mist when she was 9, and she caught this fever, and usually if you catch the fever, you're sentenced to death. Elspeth was hidden by her family, and their family has kept the infection a secret, and the reason that you're sentenced to death is because if you catch the infection, you develop a kind of magic, and this magic will eventually kill you. Usually, the magic in the world is run by a set of 12 cards, and that's supposed to be the only way that you can access magic. If you get infected, you develop magic on your own. She is being hidden by her family, and then she goes to the palace because her cousin has been betrothed to the prince in exchange for one of these cards. It sounds complicated when I'm explaining it, but it's actually one of the simplest magic systems I've ever read in a fantasy. And I rated this book 4.5 stars. I forgot to mention, The girl's magic is that she has this monster living inside her head called the Nightmare. That is an element that I want to touch on more in a second though. This book I rated 4.5 stars. The romance was very subtle in it, but it was really good. And it immediately made me want to go into Two Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillig, which I actually DNF'd. You know how I talked about the monster that is living inside her head? It wasn't that bad in the first book. And then even like at the end of the first book, it didn't get too crazy to me. And I got 75% of the way through Two Twisted Crowns. The entire time I was reading it, I was just very uncomfortable. It got very demonic, for lack of a better term. That's not me saying it if you've read it, like that's bad on you. I just felt incredibly uncomfortable reading it, and I actually ended up returning it to Barnes & Noble. And the lady kind of looked at me and she was like, "Don't bend the cover next time you come to return something." I was really sad that I DNF'd. That I had to DNF that book, especially being 75% of the way through. If you are, like, paranormal is what I do not. I do not touch paranormal when I'm reading, and usually I'm okay with it in fantasy, because fantasy elements don't usually bother me. But the way that was, it just felt so, like, it just felt like demonic possession. And that is something that I never ever read about or touch on. I can't do it. I went from there. I was in a thriller kick at the end of April and the beginning of May, because I then read The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This is a thriller. The Last Word by Taylor Adams is about this woman, and she is house sitting a lake house. This is one of those thrillers where a woman finds herself between a rock and a hard place, and she takes a sketchy job that for some reason no one wants, but it seems like a dream. So she's house sitting for this lake house and getting paid really well. But this lake house is really isolated. And basically she's just in there reading Wattpad-ish thrillers on her Kindle. Trashy thrillers. And she rates one of them 1 star. The author of the book then stalks her. And it is someone's inside your house hostage situation. Very entertaining. Could not put this book down. I rated it 4.25 stars, which I will have to go and read more Taylor Adams. I'm trying to remember what my issues were with it. Sometimes thrillers like that bother me, where I relate to the female character when the female is kind of like off her rocker a little bit. That bothers me when I start relating to them. Just, that's a personal issue. My guess is that is why I dropped the rating of that. This is not a spoiler, but at one point in the book, there is like a fake acknowledgements page. It's the acknowledgements for a book within a book. And I flipped out because I thought that the story ended a way that it did not end. And I flipped out. I threw the book, and I actually ripped like a chunk of the page off, which was really awkward. It was a little tiny chunk, but it was a library book, so that was rough. Again, it's one of those thrillers where you really didn't know what was going on until the very end, and those are always so fun. Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I actually read the Part of Your World trilogy backwards, so you'll know I read Just for the Summer in April, and then I read Yours Truly next. You have Brianna and you have Jacob, and Brianna is a doctor in the ER. Jacob is what is Jacob? I don't remember what Jacob's position is, but he's also a doctor. And Jacob has just transferred to Brianna's hospital. And so no one really likes him because he is an extreme introvert with like social anxiety. So he comes off as very standoffish and like he doesn't like people. Even Brianna doesn't like him at first because she has some crazy family stuff going on, which Abby Jimenez is really good at writing, by the way. She's really good at writing side plots with family drama and different things. So poor Brianna, she has just gone through a divorce, and then this dude is kind of like taking it out on her at work. She thinks that he's been brought to like take a promotion from her. So it's just a whole mess. And so she doesn't like him at first either. And then it turns into like a fake dating trope, and there's this other trope in there that I don't know if I've ever read it before, and I didn't know if I would like it, but I did read it and I actually loved it. Jacob is the sweetest man ever once he figures out how to show, like, he's in, what's it called? I think he's an active serviceman. I think that was what it was. Their relationship was just so precious, and the point in my life I was reading it, it was making me sob my eyes out in public. Like, I loved this book. I rated it 4.5 stars. I cannot wait for Abby Jimenez to release more books. I completely understand what people mean when they say Abby Jimenez is like a breath of fresh air, because that is so true. The next book that I read is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This one I actually listened to as an audiobook. I think I prefer reading Abby Jimenez's books specifically, physically. And Part of Your World I actually never thought that I would read because it is an age gap and the woman is actually 10 years older than the guy. And just in my personal life, I'm like, if the woman is older than the man, I can't do it. I think that women mature much quicker than men, so I thought that I was gonna have a real issue with that. But Daniel and Alexis are perfect for each other, and you don't even really think about the age gap. I mean, they talk about it some in the beginning, but they don't really talk about it after that. So it's not a huge part of the story. It's a small town romance. Alexis works at the same hospital that Brianna and everyone else does in that little trilogy, and she runs off the side of the ditch, and Daniel comes and like tows her out in the middle of nowhere. And he lives in a small town. He's a small town man running a small town bed and breakfast, and Alexis is hospital royalty. She is a part of this like medical family who has run this hospital for over 100 years. So she's like around all of these rich people, and she's incredibly rich herself, and their lifestyles are just completely different. I did not like Alexis at first at all. Her personality at first, she's just so stingy and stuck up, which I have such a problem with. But Daniel really changed her, and Brianna has said that a lot in Yours Truly, because Brianna and Alexis are best friends. And Brianna would always be like, Alexis has changed so much. Daniel does change Alexis a lot in the first book. Again, she has a lot of family drama going on. Daniel has some family drama going on. It's just really, really entertaining. And it's just so endearing. Abby Jimenez is so good at writing captivating romances with really like emotional depth and all of that. I rated it 4.25 stars, and I want to reread that entire trilogy, and I want to own the whole trilogy. It's a whole mess. The next book that I read is also an audiobook, and that is The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. This is a true rom-com, which I do not remember the last time that I read just a silly, goofy romance where it's like silly, and there's emotional depth in it, but not a lot. The Bodyguard is Hannah. She is the woman. She is the bodyguard for a famous actor named Jack. Jack needs a bodyguard because he's going home to see his family because something tragic is happening in his family that he needs to go home and deal with. But he doesn't want his family to know that he needs protection. So they hire Hannah, and he actually asked her to fake being his girlfriend. This is my first bodyguard trope, and the one of them is famous trope is always so funny because there are always tabloids involved, and there are always like paparazzi, and it always just gets tangled up. It's just really entertaining because they have to like keep the relationship a secret from the public, and it's really entertaining sometimes to see how they do that. And it's just a funny book. Like I said, there's some like tragic stuff going on in Jack's family, but it's not heavy at all. I was laughing reading this book. It's a small town romance in Texas, which is so cute. It takes place on a ranch, which is so fun. And it's no spice. I think all of the other romances I've talked about, other than the YA one I mentioned earlier, all have spice in them. This book does not have spice, which is, it's just amazing. I do not read for spice. I skip over spice. So that was really, really nice. Like I said, it didn't have as much depth to it as like an Abby Jimenez book. So I think that was what took it down from a 5-star to a 4-star. I rated this book 4 stars. So, but yeah, it was really good and really sweet. And actually, if you're looking for a good summer romance, highly recommend The Bodyguard. This was a really good reading month. I only had 3 books rated below a 4-star, which is very rare. All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers is another audiobook that I listened to. This is a small town thriller, and it takes place in a small town in Indiana. The woman is coming back to take care of a sick family member to her hometown, and suddenly this 6-year-old girl from a neighboring town is being kidnapped. And it reminds her of when she was 6 years old and her best friend who lived next door was kidnapped. And she's a journalist, so she starts covering the story. She starts trying to connect the 2 stories. She's worried that the killer has come back. And it reads like a true crime podcast, especially if you listen to it. It just didn't really feel like I was on the edge of my seat. It felt more like someone was just telling me the story. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's just, that's not why I'm reading the book. If I wanted that, I would go and listen to a true crime podcast. And then the ending of the book was just awful. It wasn't a cliffhanger necessarily, but it wasn't fleshed out to the point where all the questions were answered. So I actually rated it 2.75 stars. Like I said, I did not hate the book, but I definitely didn't like it, and I wouldn't recommend it. Like, you'd be better off just listening to a true crime podcast. The next book that I read is What Happens After Midnight. I finally have a copy of the book that I'm talking about. What Happens After Midnight by K.L. Walter is the same author who wrote The Summer of Broken Rules, which I read last May. And this book takes place at a boarding school, and every year the senior class at this boarding school, they do a senior prank right before prom. And it's technically against school rules, but it's one of those things, like, as long as you aren't caught, who cares? The main girl, Lily, and the guy, Tag, they are both called to partake in this prank. And they used to date, but they broke up like a year before this is happening, and they don't talk anymore. So this is the first time that they've really spent time with each other since they broke up. So it's a second chance romance. And with second chance romances, I feel like there's always miscommunication. Because if they broke up and they haven't done something bad enough to where they can't get back together, usually it's miscommunication. The miscommunication in this book is awful. For that's the main reason that I rated it at 3.5 stars. This story also just didn't feel completely fleshed out, which I feel like you can get away with shorter timelines for second chance romances. But the shorter timeline in this book, the main plot of the story takes place over one night as they're hiding the scavenger hunt clues for the prank. It's only a few days after that as the story progresses. So it just doesn't feel complete. But again, this is a book that I read because I was graduating in May, and I think that atmosphere was just perfect for the time that I was reading the book. The second chance romance aspect of it was kind of difficult for me to read at this point in my life. The next book that I read is Powerful by Lauren Roberts. This is a novella. It is only 221 pages long. It is tiny. Like, this is how big it is compared to What Happens After Midnight. Like, it's very small. This centers around Adina, who is Peyton's best friend from Powerless, and Adina and Peyton are complete opposites, but I still loved Adina. Adina is this happy-go-lucky, bubbly, talkative personality, and she is just so sweet. It follows her and her love interest during the trials that Peyton is doing. I related to both her and her love interest, but I related to her love interest so much. This is a novella, and I was highlighting and marking quotes in this book, which just goes to show that Lauren Roberts is a whiz. Like, she's a genius at writing banter, at writing romance, at writing tension, and the only reason that this book is not a 5 stars is because it is not fully fleshed out. And if you know how Powerless ends, it makes this book so hard to read. It's almost like If He Had Been With Me, where you're like blocking the ending out of your head and you're like, please don't let this be how it ends, and it still ends the way that you know it's gonna end, and it's just so sad. So sad. But I did rate this book 4 stars. I would have read another 200 pages about these characters. They were precious. However, with it being a novella, I feel like we got scenes of them together. It wasn't a fully fleshed out story. It felt like we jumped from scene to scene to scene, and just the 2 characters together, their chemistry was great. It was missing the connecting parts in between. The last book that I read in May is Float by Kate Marchant. This is a Wattpad book, which I've heard that the girl started writing it, I think when she was 15 or 16, and she didn't finish it until she was a little bit older, and then she got it published. But this book centers around a girl named Waverly. Waverly is from Alaska, and her parents are climatologists. She goes to this prestigious private school, so she doesn't really have a group of friends. She doesn't really get that high school experience, but her parents ship her off to Florida for a month to live with her aunt over the summer. And she meets the next door neighbor Blake, and she gets into his friend group. And this book reminds me of The Summer I Turned Pretty, in that it is just a nostalgic summer read. Have I ever been to the beach and found like a group of friends like that? No. Have I even ever had like the traditional high school experience where you get that friend group? No, I have not. But that is what this book is, and it was just so wholesome and so sweet. And it's a YA romance, so no spice, but the characters were just so cute together. I actually rated it 4.25 stars. This book was brainless. The only reason that I didn't rate it 5 stars is just because it was brainless. Like, it took no energy for me to read. The writing was not fantastic. There were scenes in here where it was like, yeah, I can tell that was written by a 16-year-old. But the main girl is 16, so having it written by a 16-year-old, I feel like actually almost makes it more authentic. The fact that this was like an actual Wattpad book, that makes me kind of sort of maybe want to go and try like books that are described as Wattpad-y. Like Say You Swear is on my June TBR. I'm hoping that maybe because I liked this book, I will like that book. We'll see. But this book made me want to go and lay out on the beach. Alright guys, well, I hope you enjoyed my May wrap up. I feel like I was not as bubbly and talkative today as I normally am. I feel like I was very cut and dry. So hopefully I was still entertaining to you. And hopefully it was good for you to hear about all these books that I read. I don't know why you guys care about what I'm reading, but it makes me very happy. And if you're watching this towards the end of the video, thank you. You are what keeps this channel going. And yeah. Alright. Well, I guess that's all I have for you today. We'll see how much I can upload in June because I am traveling a lot. So yeah. Alright. I love you guys. I'll see you soon. Bye.